It began like any other morning at the Swaggart estate: calm skies, golden sunlight spilling across the manicured lawns of Baton Rouge. The house stood still, wrapped in peace and routine. Inside, Frances Swaggart had already started her day, rising before the sun, as she always did. In a quiet corner of her home, she bowed her head in prayer, unaware that this would not be an ordinary day. Not by a long shot, because behind that morning calm, something was shifting. Something no one saw coming. What was meant to be another routine day in the Swaggart household quickly unraveled into a moment that would send shockwaves through their legacy. What happened next has left the church world shaken, and now everyone's asking the same question: what really happened inside the Swaggart home that morning? She had always begun her mornings in the quiet presence of God, a ritual that never wavered, no matter how hectic life became. That day was no different. Frances Swaggart moved gracefully through the kitchen, exchanging warm smiles and gentle greetings with the staff. There was no hint of distress, no sign of the storm silently gathering. But life has a cruel way of hiding its sharpest turns in moments of serenity. As she prepared to join a small meeting with her ministry team, something in the air shifted. Something felt off. Mid-sentence, Frances faltered. Her voice weakened. Her hand reached out, trembling toward a nearby chair. Her skin turned pale, and her breath grew shallow. At first, it seemed like simple fatigue, the kind that comes from long days and little rest. But within seconds, that illusion shattered. Frances's knees buckled. She collapsed, gently but suddenly, into the arms of an assistant. The room froze. Shock rippled through the air before panic took over. A staff member bolted for the phone. 911 was called, and in that sacred space where prayers once echoed, silence fell, heavy, terrifying, and full of questions no one was ready to face. Someone else attempted to check her pulse as another hurried to warn Donnie. Her eyes were closed and her body still. Panic and anxiety quickly entered the Swaggart home that normally carried the peaceful hum of everyday routine. Employees shouted for assistance as they hurried through the corridors. As they awaited the ambulance, medical supplies were promptly brought in from the little on-site clinic. Within minutes, word of the news got around the house. Frances is not feeling good. There has been a serious incident. All else faded in that instant. The daily planning, the meetings, and the timetables. There was only one thing that mattered now: praying that it wasn't too late and getting Frances the assistance she required. The little family chapel had always been one of Frances's favorite spots on earth, hidden away in a peaceful area of the land. The chapel was not ornate or opulent. It was private, full of memories, prayers, and holy tranquility that spanned years. She had requested to be escorted there for a brief period of worship that morning, even though she wasn't feeling well. She didn't want to stop her daily time spent with God. Prayer wasn't merely an aspect of life to her, it was life. Keeping her Bible close to her chest, she walked carefully into the chapel, knowing that Frances preferred to sit by himself for a few minutes before others joined in. A few close assistants accompanied her, but maintained a respectful distance. With her hands linked, she knelt down gently and took her seat at the first pew. Softly, her lips moved, uttering something that only God could hear. From the outside, it appeared to be a typical morning calm, concentrated and serene. But in a matter of seconds, a transformation occurred. Her hands started to shake a little as she stood up to read a piece. She grasped the wooden pew's edge in an attempt to balance herself, but her strength was obviously waning. She let out a little gasp, not loud enough for anyone to hear. Then Frances stumbled forward and fell on the church floor as though her body could no longer support her soul. The Bible fell out of her grasp and dropped next to her with a gentle thump. In a panic, one of the assistants hurried forward and called her name, Miss S. "Can you hear me, Frances?" She didn't answer though. Her respiration was irregular and shallow, and her eyes were closed. The once holy silence of the chapel now seemed ominous. While one of the aides knelt next to Frances, monitoring her pulse and attempting to keep her conscious, the other quickly dialed for assistance on the emergency phone. The chapel, which had always been a sanctuary of calm, was suddenly filled with anxiety and haste. Someone ran to tell Donnie as main building staff hurried in. The dread in their eyes spoke more than any words could. This does not appear to be a little incident. Working swiftly, the crew delicately lifted her onto a stretcher that ministry officials had brought in. Frances's favorite sound, the low hum of a hymn still playing in the background, was the only sound left in the chapel. No one could have predicted what had happened in that hallowed place, so full of devotion. Her favorite spot was where Frances Swaggart, the center of the ministry and a source of strength for many, had fallen. Everything around Donnie Swaggart appeared to blur when the urgent call to his office came through. One of the employees hurried in, breathless and pallid, spoke hardly at all. She stumbled in the chapel and said, "It's your mother?" Donnie froze in shock for a moment, just staring. It didn't feel like real. His mother, Frances? It isn't possible. However, the staff member's eyes sent a serious message. Donnie left his office without thinking twice and sprinted down the hallway, his heart thumping louder with each step as his footsteps reverberated off the walls. Frances was lying still and pale on the floor when he arrived at the chapel, where paramedics were already tending to him. Beside her, the Bible she had dropped lay calmly, undisturbed. The image of his mother, who had reared him, supported him throughout difficult times, and prayed for him for many years. He struck him like a blow to the chest while he was unconscious and unresponsive. Beside her, Donnie fell to his knees. "Can you hear me, Mama? Mom?" As he grabbed for her hand and held it tenderly between both of his voice broke. It was chilly. His eyes were filled with desperation as he glanced up at the medics. "Help her, please, please. Take whatever action is necessary. Keep her around." It was the first time in a long time that the leader and preacher vanished. All that was left was a son, a fearful, defenseless son, watching in front of him as the lady he loved more than life itself vanished. He held back tears that threatened to spill from his eyes as he said prayers through quivering lips. His head whirled with memories, quiet conversations with his mother late at night, ministry trips, and family dinners. Could this be how it all ends? Employees watched in hushed admiration, keeping a safe distance from him. Nobody was brave enough to speak. They were aware of Donnie and Frances's close relationship. He was more than her son. He was her greatest ally, her ministry partner, and her shadow. It would be more than a personal loss to lose her. It would break your heart. Donnie stood and walked behind Frances, unwilling to leave her side when the medical staff eventually placed him onto the stretcher. As they rolled her out toward the ambulance that was waiting, his hands continued to rest lightly on her arm. Nothing else mattered to him. Not the calls, not the job, not the schedule. His sole goal at the moment was to save his mother's life. "Please, God, not like this," Donnie said again, placing one hand on the back as the ambulance doors closed. A thick stillness descended over the family worship center as word of Frances Swaggart's unexpected fall started to circulate outside the chapel walls. Jimmy Swaggart Ministry Center. Normally, the building was a hive of movement, music, and ministry, but now it felt different. It seemed as though the place's spirit had stopped, awaiting responses that no one could provide. Phones rang softly in the main office, but many were unanswered. Unsure of what to say, employees murmured to each other. As the ambulance vanished down the lengthy driveway, some people watched from the windows. At their desks, others lowered their heads in silent prayer. The normal hum of everyday life gave way to a silence that was profoundly unnerving and almost hallowed. Frances was more than just the ministry's leader. She was the lifeblood of many. She had been the steady hand behind the scenes for more than 50 years, planning events, supporting employees, praying for churchgoers, and supporting her family through every season. Even for a brief while, her absence left a perceptible gap. Unbeknownst to them, a few longtime staff members assembled in the prayer room. Out of genuine love and care, rather than out of formality, they clasped hands and started praying. Some sat in silence, deep in thought, while others let forth soft sobs. There were only unadulterated feelings, no announcements or speeches. They were praying for someone they thought of as family, not just a leader. A few early guests who had come for prayer or counseling noted the tension in the church. Word was getting around, but nobody wanted to say too much until Donnie or someone from the family made an official announcement. One old woman, who had been a longtime member of the ministry, whispered to a friend, "Something's not right. I can feel it." The organist stopped and looked up, her eyes full of sorrow, and even the choir, assembled for a lunchtime rehearsal, became silent. Something very personal, rather than external noise or criticism, had upset the ministry's usual rhythm. The silence suddenly had a new significance for a place founded on worship and faith. It was a prayer unto itself. The campus looked to be holding its breath in every room, hallway, and nook. People walked more slowly, Talk stopped in the middle of sentences. Every idea came back to the same query. Would Francis be able to attend? The ministry was no longer about organizing services or managing programs at that point. It was about unity, hope, and the silent but potent strength of a community and family holding fast to their faith. The tension at the family worship center peaked in the early evening. Since Francis was taken to the hospital, hours had gone by, and the family had yet to provide an official statement. The phones were still ringing. A heartbreaking query. Is Francis doing well? Donnie Swaggart gathered his thoughts in silence behind closed doors. Doctors had not yet provided a complete picture of his mother's condition, and she remained under tight surveillance in the hospital. However, Donnie was aware that the public deserved to hear something. Francis was adored by them. For decades, they had looked up to her, learnt from her, and prayed with her. Remaining mute would just increase the level of fear. Donnie entered the ministry's media room around 6:30 p.m. He appeared worn out not physically, but mentally. His speech was a little gruff, and his eyes were red. Nevertheless, he maintained the decorum that his mother had instilled in him. He started to pause deliberately in between statements, determined to speak honestly and with faith. Friends, I want to express my gratitude to everyone who has gotten in touch with me today. To those who have called, prayed, and supported our family at this trying time. After taking a deep breath, he went on. I was with my mother, Sister Frances Swaggart, and I can tell you that it was one of the most terrifying moments of my life. She had a serious medical episode this morning while in the family chapel. She collapsed unexpectedly and was taken to the hospital right away. His voice briefly broke, revealing the emotion he was expressing. This was more than just a leader addressing a crowd. This was a heartfelt statement from a son. He told the audience that Frances was under the care of some of the top medical professionals in the area and that, although still serious, her health was stable for the time being. We have faith in God for a complete recovery, he stated. However, we also recognize that your prayers are more important than you can think at this moment. Please keep praying. Donnie said a quiet but heartfelt thank you to end the little message. When we learn more, we'll let you know. Please remain in faith with us till then. I know my mother feels your love, and she is a warrior. Within minutes of the statement being posted to all ministry channels, thousands of people had viewed, shared, and replied. People from all across the world left comments. The confirmation offered clarity, but it didn't take away the terror. Some were crying, some were quoting scripture, and some were just typing, "We're praying." More significantly, it brought together the hearts of all those who had ever been moved by Frances Swaggart's teachings, her voice, and her unfailing love for humanity. There was no hesitancy once the rest of the Swaggart family heard. Gabrielle dropped everything and hurried to the hospital with other close family members. Moved by the same terror that had seized Donnie earlier that day, even extended family members who were not usually in the spotlight made their way there. For them, Frances was more than a grandma or mother. She had kept the family together through innumerable storms and been the fulcrum of their existence. When they got there, they saw Donnie sitting next to Frances' chamber, his shoulders hunched, and his face was filled with fatigue. As soon as Gabriel entered, he got to his feet, and the two of them embraced, sharing an unsaid awareness of how fleeting life may feel. The machines in Frances' room beeped continuously. In contrast to the powerful woman who had stood behind a pulpit for decades, she appeared so little and motionless in that hospital bed. Her hands were peacefully by her side, and her hair was brushed back gently. However, none of them was prepared to recognize the fragility that was within her. Even though they knew she would not hear, the family alternated standing near and offering encouraging words and prayers. The story had spread like wildfire outside those hospital gates. To pray for Frances, members of the Family Worship Center established prayer chains, with scores of people coming together every hour. Messages from all throughout the country filled social media. Numerous people shared how Frances had inspired and influenced their beliefs throughout the years. Comments were coming in from all directions. Sister Frances is in my prayers. When I was at my lowest, she gave me strength. She has more job to perform for God. The solidarity was strong. In addition to being blood relatives, it felt like a spiritual family uniting to support a woman who had devoted her life to helping others. People were stopping their own services to pray for Frances by name, even in different churches around town. The Swaggart family attempted to maintain normal conversation in order to calm themselves back in the hospital, but the fear permeated every word and every quiet. Holding her hand and recalling times as a child when she had prayed for him throughout his own hardships, Gabriel pulled up a chair next Francis. Now every second felt valuable. She was thankful for every breath she took. They were reminded that they were not alone by the prayers of thousands of people outside, which encircled them like a cozy blanket. In the hospital room where Francis Swaggart lay motionless, something changed after over 48 hours of tense waiting, prayer vigils, and medical uncertainty. Nurses resumed their silent check-ins while the monitors beeped steadily. However, on the third morning, when the first rays of dawn peeked through the window, a slight movement shattered the stillness. Francis's fingers twitched a little before her eyes opened. The on-duty nurse initially believed she was having hallucinations. The understanding, however, came as a comfort when Frances blinked once more and softly moved her head on the cushion. "She's waking up," the nurse said in a tremulous tone. As soon as the call button was touched, personnel and doctors hurried in, gently checking her vitals and conversing with her. Frances squinted slightly and whispered her first words. "Mrs. Swaggart, can you hear me?" One of them said gently. "Jesus, thank you." She could hardly hear them, but they were full of strength and faith. The physicians exchanged astonished and respectful looks. This woman was starting to come back, frail in form, but fiercely strong in spirit. When the call reached Donnie, he was down the hall. "She's conscious." He remained silent. He just sprinted faster than he had in years, and with tears already welling in his eyes. He arrived at her bedside gasping for air. Frances carefully turned her head in his direction as he entered the room. A tiny, soft smile appeared on her face as their eyes locked. It was more than a simple smile of acknowledgement. The smile sent the message, "I remain here." Donnie, overtaken with emotion, knelt down next to her bed and grasped her hand in his. "Mama," he muttered, "God isn't done with me yet." Still feeble but completely present, Francis clasped his palm just enough to murmur, "God held me the whole time. You scared us all." There was only a silent moment of love, relief, and thankfulness, no theatrical speeches or loud proclamations. After the storm there came a holy pause. Gabriel came in behind Donnie, tears streaming down his cheeks. In a whisper, he kissed his grandmother's forehead and said, "Thank you for staying." Word soon traveled across the ministry and the hospital. The phones rang once again, joyfully. Employees gave each other hugs. Online supporters showered the ministry pages with compliments. Worship burst out in churches that had been praying continuously. As they read the update, some people in their homes started crying. Her eyes had been awakened by Francis Swaggart. Her recuperation was only getting started. However, her awakening, her first grin, and her muttered prayer served as a reminder to everyone that miracles and faith were still possible. A full week had passed since Francis Swaggart's untimely collapse rocked her family, the ministry, and the emotions of many supporters worldwide. And now, as she lay in her hospital room, still surrounded by nurses who were watching over her and gentle beeping devices, even her doctors were taken aback by what she requested. She continued, "I'd like to speak to the people." In a calm, if slightly weary voice, the audience fell silent. "Just a few words. They need to hear me." Donnie, who had been by her side almost constantly since the event, gave her a proud but wary expression. "Are you sure, Mama? They've prayed for me," he said softly, and Frances nodded and grinned. "They joined me in standing." With the assistance of a nurse, Donnie held up a small foam camera, showing Frances sitting slightly upright in her hospital bed, wrapped in a soft blanket, her silver hair brushed neatly, and a serene expression on her face. They deserve to know that their prayers were heard. "Hello, my dear friends. This is Sister Frances. I don't have much strength or words today, but I do have something very important to say. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for your love, prayers, and faith." She stared into the camera and started talking. "I felt those prayers even when I couldn't speak. Even when I didn't know what was happening around me, I felt God's presence and I felt your love." Her voice became stronger with each sentence. She paused for a moment, holding back tears. "I've always believed that faith is what gets us through the darkest moments of life." She smiled, the same kind smile that had comforted thousands of people over the years. "I don't know what tomorrow holds, but I do know who holds tomorrow. And as long as I have breath, I'll continue to praise Him." And this past week, I walked through one of those dark hours, but I wasn't alone. The Lord was with me, and so were all of you. They didn't need to sing anymore. It was enough, so Donnie gently cut the tape short.